Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cactus Patch. I am your host, Glitch Cactus, but you can call me Cactus. And today we have a very exciting episode for you today. We're going to be talking about player skill development. That's been a very popular topic recently in the Splatoon community, mainly on social media such as Twitter. And joining us today to talk about this topic, we have Ren. Ren, how are you doing? And feel free to introduce yourself.
I'm doing well. You're so good at this, by the way.
Thank you.
That came off so naturally. No, I'm doing all right. For those who don't know me, I'm Ren. I like watching the game more than I do like playing it. So I'm mostly like watching tournament VODs and stuff like that. And trying to understand like why things are the way that they are. I think most people know me from like helping out Jackpot a lot in the past year, but I've also helped Sayonara in the year like prior to that. And then before that, I was also like pretty invested in the comp scene myself. At least up till like 2020 or so.
Did you used to compete? So prior so
Yeah.
prior to 2020, you used to compete. So what kind of was like that switch for you that made you go from I'm gonna compete and then I'm actually gonna sit back and like help others get better?
Um, I feel like this is something that kind of would come up naturally in like in the discussion as it goes.
Okay,
But I don't mind. I don't mind just bringing it up
we could always
right
save it
now.
later if you'd like. I don't mind.
I mean, we got to keep people interested, you
So
know.
true. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, little taste of what they're gonna get. All right,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. Um, so this whole starting right off the bat, the whole discussion of player skill development. So how did I mean you were kind of one of the prominent figures I was seeing talk about this on Twitter. How did this whole kind of discussion just kind of start and kind of blow up recently and not maybe prior to certain major tournaments or events or maybe much
Mhm.
in like previous games like S2?
I feel like it was always something that was like brought up,
Hmm.
at least at least in like my circles.
Okay.
Um, and I know sometimes like it did come up like once or twice as like a big thing back in like Splatoon 2.
Hmm.
But not to like that extent. Maybe it's because I was in the middle of it this time.
Got you. Okay.
Um, as for how it came up, well, I only know like what I saw like when I initially got into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I after like the whole thing with Jackpot,
Hmm.
I kind of was more open to helping out like random little like teams or players and stuff like that
Yeah.
that I haven't like that aren't at like the top level.
Yeah. 100%.
Um, and it's not like a dig or anything, but it felt like how I used to play the game back in
Hmm.
like 2020 or so. But it was also around the same skill level that I was at that point. So I'm trying to figure out like okay why is it this way?
Hmm.
And that's when I saw I think it was Fuzzy's tweet
Hmm.
um on like how the West like sees improvement
Oh yeah,
in terms of
versus
like
like East and like JP and everyone.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And it kind of like clicked again because again this is like years of context because we had like these conversations in the past.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, it kind of like clicked where um I'm like really out of touch with things like plus two, plus server, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, and so I kind of saw it as like, wait a minute, I think that like this is just it's like a different way of like viewing things, not for the sake of improvement, but for the sake of like um basically if you change one thing, you'll get better type deal. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
Yeah. No. Absolutely.
If we copy Japan, then I'll be better type deal, or as
Hmm.
like a team, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of like connected all these different dots, whether it's valid or not, or sound or not, I don't know.
Hmm.
It's just how I felt about it. And then at that point in time, I was so jaded because I remember all of those conversations of the past, and then I
Yeah.
see it firsthand, and I'm like, I have to say something, like something that was like at least a little bit antagonistic without just being full doomer. You know what I
Yeah. No.
mean? To
Absolutely.
kind of get people to speak out against me, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Because you had, like you mentioned, you've had that experience before in the previous games throughout the years, and
Hmm.
you're in a kind of an opportunity now, where you have that little bit gain of that traction and that following that platform where you want to bring a different perspective to the table in hopes of
Right.
engaging other players that might be at the top level or might be at like even mid level or even low level, right? Just kind of challenge or ask those kind of questions that make them wonder and kind of pick your brain in a sense about like, well, what about this or that? And I like how you mentioned about, trying to copy Japan in a sense. I feel like whenever we would see things Japan would do, right, it always became down to what's their meta, what are they playing, let's look at their tournaments,
Exactly.
but it's never how did they come to this, like what did they do, what along their path led them to picking, like at the world champs it was like double screen, right, or like we
Mhm.
learned that double screen was like in their meta, but how did we get there, what was the decision that them as like their community made that was like, hold on, this is good.
Right. Yeah, it's like you're taking it out of the context of the meta that it belongs to, because like
Yeah.
the West, like Japan and everybody, even NA to EU have like slightly different metas, but
Hmm.
especially with Japan because they're isolated from us or vice versa.
Yeah.
Um, they have their meta is completely different. Even if they share certain traits. And a lot of it too, like past even just how did it get there, it's also how is it used
Hmm.
in those comps, right?
Yeah.
Because it can come down to like a Neo Splash thing is a great example, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like you see Neo Splash is very prominent in Japan, so then we're like, oh, Neo Splash is good, so let's just throw it on our support player and roll with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, without actually
But
seeing like why is it good though? Like
exactly,
how are
like
they
what
using this
comps
to
or
take
something like that.
advantage?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's
Um.
awesome.
Yeah. But so it's mostly like I feel like that's where a lot of the discussion kind of stemmed from, and then it like deviated from there because my point wasn't, like I was saying earlier, my point wasn't to focus on that, but more so the underlying like motivations that players have or
Hmm.
lack of motivation even, to actually improve themselves versus like I don't want to say it's coming off a little arrogant, but like ego feeding in a way.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the primary thing that I was focusing on at that point.
Yeah, and I think it's valid because like what we see a lot from top players whenever they're playing on streams or like you see them post about it is that the lack of motivation, right? Like what are we
Mhm.
playing towards? And sometimes that will dwindle down into the lower levels. Like I've seen it a handful of times in like mid-level, a hand since as a player who plays in that kind of area where you have those events that we want to win, the SOSs, the proving grounds, super
Mhm.
jump just got reannounced, so that's going to be something to look forward to, but that kind of dwindles of like what am I competing at this level for. And I someone like me, it's more than just trying to win a tournament and say, oh, I won it, right? Like for me, I want to be able to get to a higher level. I want to be able to compete with some of these players that are so good and have been so good for so long. So I feel like it's about challenging that kind of mindset of, yeah, right now there's maybe nothing to compete for. There's no world championship. There's no like major event with like a huge prize pool or something. But that's at least for top level, and I feel like at lower levels you gotta look at like the bigger picture. Like there's more than just like,
Right.
oh, there's something for me right now, but yeah, but you're not at that level right now. Like for all you know, 6 months down the line you're low level breaking into mid level, pushing high level, and there could be like 20xx again for all we know.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I feel like even for like really low level players, like the ones that aren't like, for example, low ink band,
Hmm.
there is still that motivation to get like low ink band. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
no, absolutely.
And then it kind of, and this isn't to say that we need more of this, but it tapers off once you get low ink band because then it's like okay, the next person's like, or the next step, I guess, of a person's kind of motivation could be something like, I don't know, getting in a plus server or like getting a certain XP or something like that in
Yeah.
game. Um, but it's it's like a goal that I feel is um almost flawed in a sense, especially with plus server, but in
Hmm.
general, because it's not something that will like push you to like the steps to improve, if that makes sense. Because you can be like you can have the idea of like, oh, I want to be low ink band or I want to have a certain XP or something like that.
Yeah.
But getting like it doesn't tell you how to get there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where the questioning has to come into place. Like, this is my goal. What are
Yeah.
my steps besides I need to play more that can get me there?
Hmm. Is that a question or?
Um, well, a little bit of a mix, right? Statement and a
Yeah.
question. So, like for the players that want to, let's say, win low rank, right? Obviously, they're going to be told and see through hundreds of thousands of guides or advice. It's just like play the game more, VOD
Mhm.
review and work on X, Y, and Z, but without like looking at the smaller steps in between. That's like, okay, well, what is the proper way we should be playing? Should we be looking
Mhm.
for scrims? Do we send no queue? Do we play a lot of open? For VOD reviewing, what exactly are we looking for in these VOD reviews, and who should we review with? Just ourselves? Do we get a coach? There's a lot of these minor steps. So I guess I could turn it into a question. For these players that might be watching that are not lowing ban yet, but breaking beta and alpha bracket, and they're trying to get to that point. What are some ways they can kind of uh, start turning the gears a bit to improving in ways that will help them get to that level of being lowing band?
Um, there's a lot of ways to go about it. The the problem with me giving one generalized answer
Mm-hmm.
is that everybody's their own individual,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, 100%.
So if I were to say like for somebody who has everything like perfect in terms of how they practice, everything like that, but they just don't have the time. Let's say they play like an hour a week.
Yeah.
Their answer is literally just to play more,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Because at some
absolutely.
point, at a very even low threshold, if you're not playing enough, you're just not going to get better. Like you can understand the game better if you like VOD a lot, but
Mm-hmm.
you won't literally get better at the game because you're not stressing your mechanics enough. Um, and you're like fighting rust constantly.
Yeah.
Um, so to give that's just one example, but like to give a single answer is maybe a little bit irresponsible of me, but that won't
Yeah.
stop me, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And
So
I think that makes sense too, because like you said, everyone has their own areas they need improvement on. Like
yeah,
someone might not have the time. Another person might not know how exactly VOD reviewing works or how they should be
right.
taking the suggestions they get with VOD reviewing. Some players just might not even know where the resources are to find maybe a coach that they want to find that's either for individualized for themselves or overall for their team.
Mhm. I feel though like if I were to give something a little bit more generalized, a lot of it can come down to like basically how you look at the game, right?
Hmm.
I feel like a lot of players, and again, I'm a little bit out of touch with when it comes to like lower level because I'm more in touch with like top level.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of it comes down to sort of these outside sources that validate or try to attempt to like measure your current skill level, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Rather than like an internal like view of how you're improving, right? You're
Hmm.
kind of you like let these like external like values kind of justify the way you feel or positive or negative about yourself, right?
Yeah.
Um a big way to improve, I feel, is mentally,
Okay.
where and this isn't something everybody struggles with, but
Yeah.
if you have the ability to like ask yourself questions like putting like the ego aside, just generally like, everybody has a little bit, like
Hmm.
me
Yeah.
included.
No, 100%.
um where it's like, okay, this will feel really bad to like look back at my mistakes or to take criticism from my teammates or something like that, right?
Hmm.
um but you do it with the intent of like, how can I get better from this, right? If you like, rather than just kind of like beating yourself up over like, oh, I'm not a low ink band, I just have to get better, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like trying to look for like specifics like that. And then I can go I guess further into detail on other things like VOD review and whatnot.
Hmm.
um but I feel like that can come like naturally with a later question, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you explained that pretty well. Honestly, the mental is like one of the biggest things that affects a lot of players, and some recognize it, some don't. Right?
Hmm.
And it's not always the mental isn't always like tilting, right? And I know that's the biggest thing that a lot of players focus on, but there's certain mental aspects of the game that aren't looked at, like how are you taking might be certain like criticisms, right? Like you could say you don't tilt, but if mentally you're like you said, everyone's got a little bit of ego. If you're mentally thinking, I'm not tilting, but I know I'm good, I might not need this, you're
Right.
hindering yourself some progress you could be making from really good constructive criticism towards maybe your gameplay or decision making, and things of that nature.
Right, yeah, and I like, this is kind of a we're calling back to, like, a little bit earlier in the last question,
Hmm.
um, but Pika released a video, I think like a couple days after my like little tweet thread.
Mhm.
Um, and in part of it, he kind of called me out, and I totally get it. Like it just kind of like clicked. I was like, oh yeah, no, he's actually totally right. Like I totally
Yeah.
messed up. But in it, he had a really good point where if you kind of like leave people up to their own devices, right?
Mhm.
You have like different like branching skill. Well, you have like different levels of skill, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And each of them can kind of like branch out into different ways, right? So like if you're hard stuck at a certain skill level, right? It's probably because you like deviated in one way that other players that are better than you haven't, right?
Yeah.
And so you get stuck on that branch, right? If you're constantly like looking inwards or like you're ignoring outside feedback, for example, right?
Mhm.
You might just be like hard stuck on that branch because you're not like looking potentially you're not looking at like another way to view it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In that sense, like collaboration is also like a really big deal. So even if you're not one to tilt, even something like you said, where you just don't take criticism well, whether it be like you get defensive or you just straight up ignore it or like don't take it for face value or don't
Mhm.
even try to apply it. That's a big one. You can get stuck on that branch, you know what I mean? And like
Yeah.
struggle to climb and end up plateauing basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna give like a personal example with that too,
Mhm,
because I've personally felt that before, and I've had that happen to me where, my game sense is pretty good. Where like calls, I know what I'm doing. I can tell what's going on in the game or the match. But I for a while struggled really bad with mechanics, and there was a lot of times I would have certain coachings, and they would mention maybe it's my decision making or maybe it's something else. But I had that core feeling that I feel like it's more of a like mechanical issue because I can't win certain 1v1s or even 2v1s. I'm missing like
mhm,
really key shots. So what I would do is, I decided to take a step back and kind of review myself, even like, all right, let me see exactly how these fights are happening and that I'm losing. And, let me try practicing by playing more solo queue or something, right? More like X rank. And seeing the difference over time was incredible because that little change I made at instead of listening completely to, what one or two coaches said about, certain decision making that they're taking a guess on,
mhm.
and just going with my gut that it could just be a mechanical skill changed so much. And now it's like my mechanics are doing better, and slowly but surely that's shifting into better certain playmaking because now I'm helping out better in the 2v1s. Now I'm
You're
reacting
more like
better and
consistent,
faster.
right?
Yeah, there's more
Yeah.
consistency with how I'm playing, and now it's opened up a wide variety of, well, now that my mechanics are working better, sometimes you gotta find that even playing field because like, okay, now maybe I'm playing solo queue too much and my mechanics are getting
Mhm.
good, but now my decision making's faulty because I have solo queue rot brain.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's where it's
Yeah, it's
like,
all a balance.
yeah, it's a hard balance to try to find, but sometimes like if don't be afraid to, like you said, outreach and like find more alternatives to things that might be going wrong,
Mhm.
instead of solely hindering on to one issue that could be the problem when it just might not be. You never know.
Right. And I actually like that you touched on it being something that like you just went with your gut feeling in the end
Hmm.
because while like while it could be your like limited perspective on your own
Hmm.
that is like um that is like keeping you back, it could also not be, right?
Yeah, no,
And
100%.
but the whole point, like you said, is that you were getting out other outside perspectives to kind of give you other answers, like, oh, it could be this, could be X, Y, you know?
Hmm.
And then what in the end, like what you end up going for, that's up to you, you know? But the idea is that you're introducing yourself to those different perspectives, like you said.
Yeah, you're opening your mind up more instead of
Yeah.
focusing in on one specific issue and just kind of like experimenting with it. Like maybe you spend a week, working on your call-outs more. You hop in more scrims to with your team, or if you're not on a team, you do more sendo queue or find more pickups for tournaments
Hmm.
and try your best to, whether it's calling out your special more, right? This is where the baby steps come in. Like, let me work on calling my special more. Let me work on calling out where I'm going to about to take a fight or a direction I'm going into. My case where I had the idea of like my mechanics, right? Let me review my gameplay and watch my 1v1s a lot more and like see how many times I missed my shots. Maybe I overcorrected, maybe I undercorrected, and
Hmm.
try to find that little niche where it's like, okay, this didn't work, let's try this. This didn't work, let's try this. Okay, that worked. It's really just comes down to experimenting, and you can't be afraid to waste a little
Right.
time seeing if that might be the issue. Because for all you know, if you spend like let's say 1 day on it rather than maybe a week, you could miss it completely because you want to be able to say, oh, I tried it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And you want to like commit to it, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah. So going off of what you mentioned before about seeing that video by Pika,
Hmm.
two other people that we mentioned, Fuzzy, and I know Gus Platoon mentioned their opinions about the matter on Twitter. Um, Obviously, you've said you've seen them, you've read them, or gone through most of them if you were able to. If it probably popped up on your timeline, but
Hmm.
um, were there some things that they maybe said that you agree or disagree with, or maybe want to like add more onto?
I don't feel like I disagreed with much. There, um, there were some moments like I think it depends. Like, okay, the way our views differ,
Hmm.
just generally, right? Because
Yeah.
like again, I came off way more antagonistic than I should have,
Yeah.
right? But I really wanted to hone in on the idea of like self responsibility
Hmm.
in that sense,
Yeah.
right? Where it's like you're the main person that has to put in the effort, right?
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be on like other people, like resources, TOs, top players, anything like that, right?
Hmm.
That's the
100%.
kind of idea I was going for. But it is really a balance, right?
Yeah.
Because there can be more resources and it can make the job easier for people at the same time, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of value in that I like grossly understated in what I said online, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. It comes down to that what's the word I'm looking for? Self responsibility. That
Right.
okay, it's like yes, you're trying to blame X, Y, and Z for a lot of things, or you're trying to find these certain ways to improve on whatever it might be, but you have to take the responsibility of you're the this is for your improvement, your
Exactly. Yeah.
gameplay, whatever you're doing, and if you like you said, some people get really defensive about certain things. So it's like you have to have that open mind of, you did this with whatever it might be, whether it was a wrong move in the game, a wrong play, or even just overall, like, the resources you're trying to pick and find, you're choosing to follow that path. It's just up to you if you're going to follow that line completely or outsource and outreach more to different varieties and different opinions and even maybe different guides that try to push you in that better direction.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, to a large extent. And also just like that inward kind of self-examination as well, like you had with mechanics, for example.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, 100%. Because the last thing because I always like to think that it doesn't hurt to review yourself or like by yourself or with your team if you do like
Hmm.
team VODs, but don't be afraid to in a sense, take the L and be like, yeah, we need more help with this, or I need more help with this,
Right. Yeah.
and start trying to find the resources that will help you in whatever field you think you need, or if you're not even sure what direction to start, find someone that will be able to push you in the right direction.
Yeah. Like, yeah. Or, yeah. Just like even I get a lot of DMs of people like asking questions, not necessarily for the coaching aspect,
Hmm.
but just they come to me with a question and I'm always like happy to answer. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there are a lot of, and that goes for not just me, but there's a lot of people even at like a top level where you can just talk to them, just ask them questions. They're all like accessible. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
that doesn't mean everybody would answer you, right? Because I'm not trying to extend that invite out, but at least for me, like if you come to me with a question, I'm always happy to answer as I'm able to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's not like the avenues towards working towards like improvement aren't there. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah, it just comes to just like don't be afraid to ask that question. That's like
Hmm.
I think the biggest thing a lot of players fear of. It's like, oh, like this person is, you know, maybe they're a really big content creator, or you think they're just miles and miles ahead of you in skill, and you might think they're too busy, but it doesn't hurt to just send that one message. Worst comes to worst is they either don't see the message or they are unable to at the time. But that's
Right.
the
Yeah.
worst. They're not gonna screenshot it and be like, "Look at this person trying to get an answer out of me."
Yeah. No, that'd be kind of cringe.
But yeah, everyone that's what like something I really like about the community is we're all able to try to help each other in certain ways and get better. And that's why I'm really glad this topic even popped up to begin with because
Hmm.
that's something I myself tried to strive to do for the community, and that's what I've done with certain videos I've made, and even with this podcast overall is just try to you know give those different perspectives and give the opportunity for players to learn and find these resources where when I first started playing competitive, I didn't even know where to begin. I was like
Hmm.
everyone who probably started back then was like just trying to search on YouTube or on Google like what is the best way to get better at Splatoon, and
Yeah.
you find those one in a million guides that back then were very rare, but now if you put in a little more effort about like your specifics what you're trying to get better at, you can try to find them.
Right. Yeah. Like to a large extent, they're on top of having like more people that understand the game better nowadays, so you can go out and like ask them.
Mhm.
Um, there, like you said, there's a lot more like there are a lot more videos, even just YouTube videos, even if they're old, like Splatoon 2
Yeah.
type, that can at the very least touch on the fundamentals of what you're looking for. So maybe you can better understand them, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I think it goes a little bit further than that. Um, you can also look like outside of the community for
Mhm.
those answers as well. And to tie back to what we were talking about at the beginning, that's actually how I ended up getting into coaching, right?
Mhm.
Because back in like Splatoon 2 around 2017, 2018, I kind of like woke up and I
Mhm.
don't know how to explain it
Yeah.
outside of just waking up
Yeah.
because I was playing since like early 2016, competitive, like early 2016.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I was just like endlessly just beating my head against the wall, you know? Like I
Yeah.
would get better, but it never felt like I would fight a team that was better than me, and it was like they're playing a different game,
Yeah.
you know? And at that point, I'm like, dude, something is wrong. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Yeah.
And it was around that time where I just happened to get into Overwatch, but it was specifically not even playing it because I didn't have the game. Like, well, I
Yeah.
had the game, but I didn't play it very often, right?
Yeah.
But it was specifically like Overwatch League, and the games. It was like Goats meta,
Mhm.
which if you don't know, just for anybody, it was basically imagine like crab meta back like in this game
Yeah.
at like the tail end, right? So back when
Okay.
when everybody kind of understood how it was played, you know,
Yeah.
and at least at a top level, it wasn't like solved, but it was like getting there, you know.
Yeah.
Um, imagine that, but it's like hyper optimized to the point where if one player used an ability like 2 seconds early or had it forced, that would decide the entire team fight.
Okay.
So what I would do is I would watch the games and look for like at every little detail, right?
Mhm.
Because it was so optimized that you could pick out these tiny little mistakes or find like a new way that somebody can force out a resource early, like a cooldown or an ultimate or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And to see how that would change the game. And this is like 20, I think it was like late 2017, I want to say, or like early 2018.
Mhm.
That completely changed how I saw Splatoon because back then it was like, oh, if we get kills, then we can push up.
Yeah.
And then like this weapon's good at getting kills. Let's do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it was very little about like special synergy or like pairing them one after another or together or something like that
Yeah.
that could create like an overwhelming force. And nowadays, like that's like common knowledge, right?
Yeah.
But back then, you wouldn't really. It, the game was very. It felt like it was more inspired by like the Smash community,
Mhm.
where it's very like single player focused. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you can do this. This is how you play, right? Rather than like how expanding on like how team play works.
Mhm.
So I come back into Splatoon 2 and I'm like, wait, nobody's doing this. Like nobody's playing this like Overwatch in the sense where like you're using your utility to enable somebody else to kind of do whatever they want to do. At least it wasn't like common knowledge. It was a
Yeah.
higher level, right? Um and it was at that point where I was like, well, I understand Overwatch fairly well. Maybe let's see like how much of this translates to. And granted, I was on a team, right? So I was playing at this time and applying it myself.
Mhm.
So I'm like, I wonder how much I can um like apply this to like teaching, like
Yeah.
what I know, what I learned from Overwatch. And it worked kind of. There's a lot of like we were talking about Pika's branching analogy or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
I was firmly planted on this Overwatch branch, right? And I
Yeah.
had to unlearn a lot of it to transfer the fundamentals.
Okay.
But the idea is that I built those fundamentals, right?
Yeah.
Um, and from there, I was able to kind of I killed my team. Yo, I killed my team because of this, but like
Oh
I killed
my
many
gosh.
teams where like you kind of like learn how to like teach those fundamentals as well.
Yeah.
Um at that level. So a lot of basically, long story short, very long meandering story.
Yeah, no, it's all good.
Um, a lot of it comes down to like a lot of different communities,
Mhm.
even things that aren't shooters, right?
Yeah.
Like Overwatch is very different from Splatoon, but it's still a shooter at its core.
Mhm.
But I was at this point, I was voting like uh CS:GO. I don't even know CS:GO. I was voting League. I would like watch like coaches.
Yeah.
I think like LS was a big coach at the time. I don't know if they're still around in League. Um, Fortnite too. Like there were so many different games, some of which that weren't even shooters, that where a lot I realized a lot of the fundamentals carry over to Splatoon, right?
Okay, yeah.
So even if Splatoon itself doesn't have a lot of resources, which I'm not saying it doesn't,
Mhm.
I think it's adequate at the very least.
Yeah.
You can still branch out of there. Like, don't be afraid to branch out and like look at other games and other communities and whatnot that are a lot more built, right? Like
Yeah.
built up, especially the ones that have money in it, like League, like Fortnite, like Overwatch. I don't know about Overwatch nowadays, but I'm sure the
Yeah.
fundamentals
I
still
know
carry.
Valorant's been really popular lately.
Valorant's a huge one. Yeah,
Yeah.
Valorant carries over fantastically, for the most part. But but yeah, I guess that's my that's my little like
Yeah,
story
no,
there.
I mean, I think that was amazing because, so many there's so many different games that a lot of players are interested in with Splatoon, right? And I always love seeing the mini communities in the community that are like, oh,
Hmm.
hey, if you're a Splatoon player who loves like competitive Pokemon or competitive like or Valorant or you name it, there's a group of people that all are gonna play together for those two different things. So it's a really cool perspective that you gave that you outsourced you know, teachings and learnings from another game, and
Hmm.
we're able to apply a lot of that to Splatoon or a good amount of it to Splatoon, and start changing the way of not only your thinking but for certain teams and players. And I think that's something that a lot more players probably should do because I think that helps a lot of creativity. And it's something that a lot of
That's a
players
big one,
kind
right?
of lack sometimes is, hey, I'm trying to get better at this and this. Let me look at how this person plays in Splatoon, how this person plays in Splatoon, or I think some people even like try to watch more of like for zones because of how much it pains. Some players will watch like how JP plays like turf war just to see like kind of what their meta is for that for see if they can carry anything over for zones or find any
Hmm.
resemblance. But when you're able to look out of that and watch something like Fortnite, right? Let's say I know like there was like a Fortnite championship not too long ago that was like online,
Right.
and you could try to see how those players play with each other because obviously there's solo, but there's duos, there's trios, and of course there's a full squad. Kind of take that niche of like, okay, well, what are they doing as a team that is somewhat similar when you're using weapons, but there's certain team aspects that could probably be carried over that could be so useful.
Right, yeah. And I think a big thing of that too, which I kind of understated as well, is that I also played the game myself. Like I played Overwatch myself.
Okay, yeah,
Um, I wasn't good, right? I mean, it was mostly like quick play or playing with
yeah,
friends. But even just immersing yourself into a different community, they they don't have the same, I guess the word would be like culture
yeah.
when
Okay,
it
yeah,
comes to Splatoon, right? For better or for worse, you know?
yeah,
But that also comes to how they play the game as well,
hmm,
right?
yeah,
Um, so basically, like a lot of people would prioritize like different things, or would introduce you to new concepts that you haven't heard about just by playing the game, even if you don't like learn it through voting yourself, right?
yeah,
Or like looking at analysts go over the like competitive games or something like that.
hmm,
Um, one thing I noticed is like in Splatoon 1 when I would like play Overwatch for a little bit, like I don't know, 20, 30 minutes. And then come to Splatoon 1 and the game felt a lot slower during fights
hmm,
to the point where it was like, "Oh, wait, I could just hold an angle." I didn't know what holding an angle was until I played Overwatch.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Cuz
yeah,
Splatoon was like literally my first shooter. Like the original Splatoon was my first shooter that I played seriously, right?
hmm,
Um, so like there's little things like that where it's like, oh yeah, I can actually apply like that's where like the click comes in, where it's like, oh yeah, all these little things that are just like second nature to all these players in other games
Mhm.
can just be applied to this game, and it's so easy. You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
it just kind of comes naturally. Even things like OS. Like I was playing a lot of OS at the time too, and the aiming, kind of the way you like read notes or like different parts of the UI, things like that. You know what I mean? Like you
Yeah.
can be more hyper aware of them. You know,
No,
but you don't get
absolutely.
that without playing those other games.
Yeah, I think something like I've even done myself is like kind of understanding like damage my weapon does, right? And I honestly, it's crazy. I thank Fortnite for that because
Mhm,
it shows you the visual hit marker, how much a weapon hits for with either its damage to shield or regular damage. So as someone like me who like for I'll use an example of playing splatter shot, right? You have of course your regular three shot, you have certain angles to fall off, and you have Zuka that has its annoying hitbox that has really good, half hit damage or direct damage. And you'll even see it in players that play in tournaments. They'll be calling out certain numbers that they hit for. And that's something that helps carry over because it's like, if you know your weapon and you play it so well enough, you start learning these certain aspects of your weapon that you're able to say like, oh, like for example, 52, right? It does 52 damage. You
mhm.
could hit a player for 52 and okay, 52 for them, I know it for me it's one more shot, but that's half damage, so you can call out like, hit him half and someone else could be close by and finish him off because they know how long they have to ideally guesstimate how much they got to hit him for. And
Right.
I feel like that way of thinking would have been possible if some players watched or played Fortnite, because it's just kind of second nature hits your brain like, oh yeah, I hit someone with like a sniper 197, they're weak, they have probably like, because what, it's like 250 now because they added the extra health shield, so
Mhm.
it's like 53 left, right? So it's like that's a one tap with like an AR and you're good. So it's amazing to think of that how other games, just even playing them or watching them, start you can start taking that and implementing into Splatoon.
I love how you said that, because that's actually that specific example, not with Fortnite, but with Valorant,
Mm-hmm.
is how my last team would do things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think, like, now that you mentioned it, it kind of clicked, right?
Yeah.
Because Valorant is very big on trading, right?
Yeah.
Um, but you're not always going to kill people. You're going to hit them, like, they may have like 150 health. You may hit them for like 129. So
Yeah.
you call that you hit them for 129 so that the next person knows, okay, I can swing more aggressively, or play in a different way to kind of play around like a potential one shot, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and they naturally, it wasn't even a me thing. They naturally just kind of carried that over to Splatoon, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
if you hit a slasher shot, hit 70, and then somebody knows, oh, I could just throw a bomb, and it's like a very, very fluid kind of setup. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I didn't even realize that until you said that just now, like where that came from.
Yeah, and I think that's what, even like at the end of like crab meta, right? Where splash was kind of being like, instead of double splash, you're running at least one, and you got a burst bomb, so you hit somebody like you said with a slosher for like 70, one
Hmm.
direct with a burst bomb, and since you have the ability to throw two, let's say you hit an indirect, you throw a second one, that player's going down.
Right. Yeah.
So it
Absolutely.
changes that it changes the play style even, or the direction that you're going to try to play around with each other on a team, into making sure you get the picks and you're able to play off of the area that you just freed up because of that pick you got on the player.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's so cool how the fundamentals kind of carry over. And man, I just love. I can't get over that example you gave. That's like perfect. That's like a perfect example of what I was talking about. Where it's like it's not prioritized in this game, but it is in other games. So you can kind of just like mesh the two together, and it's like, yeah, it's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, and even if it's not a priority, that to like call out like certain damages, right, or like for to get a player picked, right? Because obviously in Splatoon, like getting picks are important, but taking space and being able to push objective is relatively more important that you
Hmm.
want. But being able to get a player out of the way is just kind of like the cherry on top. Like, okay, that player's down, they're not on the right side. Let's say it's Rainmaker on Scourge. I could take that right side up right ramp for first check.
Hmm.
So by just being able to call out that nature of like, oh, they're weak, two things are going to happen. They're either going to try to stay and fight regardless, or pretty much the fight or flight, right? They're going to either stay and try to fight it out,
Right.
or they're going to flee away because they know they're pretty much one shot. So you're able to start challenging that ideal, and that's when sometimes you see a lot of players jump into those fights. It's like, oh, they're getting them weak. I could just help by, like you said, throwing a bomb, or even like if you have a long range weapon, like maybe even like a blaster, right? You can hit your AOE with a quick flick, because I know everyone loves those flick blaster shots, and then just keep going. And next thing you know, you got that pick, and then you're able to one save your teammate, or ideally if it gets off to a trade, but you're able to move off of that space.
Right, yeah, and that's a big thing too, is like that little optimization of like calling a damage number can tell somebody, I just need to fire a single shot and hit it, and I can move, and
Hmm.
that would increase the pace that person plays at as well.
Yeah.
Because if you just call, oh, I hit one, that blaster, that range blaster, if they can't get an immediate direct, they probably stay for 2 shots. But if you're like, I hit 180, that range blaster turns around, flicks, gets an indirect, and already is turning away. Right, they're just walking away.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, those little tiny calls are like, ah, they do so much. They do so much, and that's just one example. But there's so many little things. Like somebody in chat just mentions Crossfire and Valorant.
Hmm.
Crossfires and Valorant are a really good way for 2v1s. Yeah, exactly. Like the same idea applies. Like the way you set up crossfires in attack shooter or
Hmm.
something like that, or even Fortnite has it a little bit to a lesser extent.
Yeah.
Um, but
Especially in
yeah,
the
no,
recent
it's not something that comes naturally to Splatoon. I don't think personally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's why like a lot of players sometimes you see like a lot of not a lot of players will use it now, like Crab for example, right? It's not
Mhm.
a shining special, but back before it was like completely nerfed, you would be able to apply pressure from a longer distance with Crab for a temporary amount of time, but use that as like a crossfire, right? You're trying to beam somebody with a Crab, they're gonna run and hide, but that person in the crab can call it where they're going, and you're able to try to follow or catch them off guard
Right.
at another angle and put them in that 2v1 situation. It's like, okay, do I go right and into the crab fire, or am I going left and attempting to jump out for a player on my left? And that's kind of what you want to be able to do, and that's why 2v1s have for the longest time have been just so important and keen on a lot of victories for a lot of matches and a lot of games.
Mhm.
If you're able to take that pressure that you're adding from two separate players and to turn into that 2v1, you're able to free up space, you're able to start moving objective, you name it, you're taking another player off the field, which is so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thankfully, we
Yeah.
don't get knocked in Splatoon, or else we'd have an endless amount of squid backing on knocked bodies.
Dude, that would go hard though, no?
It would.
Maybe emotes.
I mean, could you imagine if you could just throw somebody in Splatoon off off the map?
Yo. Just hit the L. I take the
Yeah,
L.
yeah.
Oh my
In-game
god,
emoting,
stop.
please. Splatoon 4, we need it. Need more than just a squid bagging.
Absolutely.
So touching up, like you mentioned it before, a little bit ago about the resources available, in the
Mhm.
community, and that some players just aren't taking advantage of a lot of them. Um, so I wrote down here, do you feel it could be an issue of players in mid global not knowing how or where to look, whether that's player wise, team wise, you name it. Um, so I mean, I guess what are some things like some players could use to start trying to find these resources properly, right? I mean, obviously, it's not like you could just
Mm.
sometimes you could just feel free to hop on Google or something and search it up. But other
Yeah.
social medias like even just on Twitter, right? You can't really just search up a certain like title on for a tweet and it'll magically pop up. You're gonna get a lot of just random feed because it's such a large social media platform.
Right, yeah, no, it's terrible.
Yeah.
That's yeah, like a lot of, well, yeah, a lot of like Twitter resources are not very good.
Mhm.
Not because of the content itself, is because it just gets lost so easily,
Yeah,
if that's like
exactly.
your main thing. Yeah.
100%.
But generally speaking, I feel like kind of like what I was talking about earlier with like playing another game, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that I would look for would just be like tournament VODs, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it'd be somebody like giving commentary on it.
Hmm.
So like be it like a coach or a player or something like that that's just like watching it over and
Yeah.
talking about what they see. That helps a lot if you're going in totally blind but you only know the basics of the game, right?
Hmm.
Um but I feel like once you get past that point when you understand like the absolute basics, you can kind of watch back those games, and that's where I think a lot of the quote unquote resources come from,
Hmm.
are those higher quality games, be they from the West or like Japan, whatever. Um, The problem though is that a lot of people don't know how to actually VOD review,
Mhm.
and it kind of, at least I think, it kind of is like intimidating in that sense, right?
Yeah.
Because you when you think vaudeville, you're like, "Oh, we're gonna go through every single little mistake, and it's gonna be an hour or 2 hours long," you know?
Yeah.
But it can be as simple as just looking over a single fight. And I think, oh man, was it Gel, I think, on Twitter, translated one of Melon's, uh, um, what's the word? Like, not testament, but
Mhm.
experiences, right?
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Where he talked about how there was this player that would just wash him in Splatoon 2.
Mhm.
Um, every single time they fight, like they couldn't land a shot, right?
Yeah.
And at that point, they would look at their gameplay and they found like little patterns um that Mellon himself wasn't actually applying in his own games,
Mhm.
and then applied it and was like, "Oh wow, no, this is great. It works." You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And then he
100%.
got better as a player from there, and he owes that session and that player to like his wins at that in that like era of him playing, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I think a lot of that applies to players even today, right? Where it doesn't necessarily have you don't have to like do this long form analysis or whatever,
Yeah.
but it's just kind of getting an idea of where your role is or where your place is in a game, um and kind of optimizing that, right? Like
Mhm.
trying to be the best individual you can be
Yeah.
by trying to like emulate other players, not one specific player, doesn't have to be, but
Mhm.
just the general, where does this guy position, what does he talk about outside of the game, right? That when they like play your similar weapon, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
To kind of get an idea of like how they think of the game, right?
Mhm.
um and then at that point you can kind of try to emulate it yourself and see what sticks and what doesn't,
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
and once I feel like once you do that, you will kind of um you'll kind of shorten the time that like a VOD review requires of you. So early on it might be pretty rough, but once you go into a game and you start scrimming based off of like an idea that you saw, or go into X rank or whatever, of like an idea that you caught watching a game, or like that somebody said like offhand,
Yeah.
and you spend that play session doing that one thing, like hyper focusing on that one thing. Actually, I think Wadsum in Splatoon 2, I gotta find the video, made a video very similar to what I'm saying.
Mhm.
But basically you have like one little thing and make it sort of like a game, like gamify it, make it a challenge.
Mhm.
And then the next time you like review yourself, or look at another game, hopefully yourself, um, you can kind of pick apart those little things, like those little moments, like, oh, I did this thing that Mauricio did on Sword. Um, but that's an old example. But I like why didn't it work for me, right? And it could
Yeah.
come down to just like he's just mechanically better, like he's just better. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah,
But most of
100%.
the time, it's like, oh, I didn't take this position, or oh, I didn't notice that. Like when Mauricio did this, there wasn't a Kraken on field or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
if it's like a little minor thing, right? And that little tiny change you can now be aware of in your future games. And it's kind
Mhm.
of a cycle in that sense, right?
Yeah.
So it's like a constant cycle of I did this, these other players didn't do that. Is it something that needs to be changed, or is it like an awareness thing, like where the circumstance is different, but I thought they were the same? Like kind of deal like that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's why I think like VODs are a massive resource in that sense, because it is literally like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of hours just being left there on the internet for people to sift through. And sure, you have to sift through it,
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
that's the annoying part. You have to know what to look for.
Mhm.
But once you start like narrowing down to, okay, here are like the relevant players, here's my relevant weapon or weapon class, right?
Yeah.
At least as close as you can get to, you can find a lot more like valuable resources off of that, like valuable little moments to take away off of that. Um, but it's not. it's not just VODs. You also have to like I said, there has to be a lot of emphasis on like playing as well. You
Yeah.
know, so you have to be trying to apply what you learn and like testing it, stress testing it constantly to the best of your ability.
Yeah, no,
But
100%.
yeah.
I agree with that, and I think that's a really good way of looking at a type of way of VOD reviewing, right? So, like for like you said, there's so many type of tournament VODs, and even like player individual VODs to maybe upload to the
Mhm,
YouTube or find a way to keep them on Twitch for whatever reason, or even just like with the replay code feature, you can always ask a player if they're willing to share the replay code from an event, and that that allows you to see certain things that what they do. Like for me, a good example I can give is I've been trying to grind and learn 52 gal a lot. And one thing that I always failed with and fail a lot with is how to properly use wall. And there's certain players that are really good at 52. Obviously, Melon, one of the greatest. But on the
mhm,
Western side, you have a lot of different players like Apple. You have Storm T Tech. And I could go on. But sometimes what I would do is view how they some of them stream, so I'll see like how they're playing with wall in their stream, or if there's a tournament while they're playing and they're being streamed, let me look over at like on the overhead or hope for that opportunity that the camera pans over to them. How are they using that wall in game that I can start doing that's a little different? I actually
mhm.
was able to have a little bit of a rod review session with Storm T Tech, and the way they were speaking about using wall, because of course, I had to ask, um, changed my way of thinking of how wall can completely function. Because I used to, like most players, throw a wall and think, oh, I'm safe if I'm like in the middle of it, right? There's that 50-50 shot, but didn't take into account the potential field of latency, right? So you might be, 90% not in through your wall, but there's that 10%. The game might count that 10% with when a bomb gets thrown at it, and next thing you're respawning.
Right, yeah,
So
especially with this terrible tick rate in this
yeah,
game.
exactly. So I found that the best way to do it is find certain angles that you can prop your wall up and poke just a little bit further away, positioned from your wall, and just poke. And most players, when they see fire coming at their direction, they're gonna back off a little bit.
Mhm.
So I've been able to try to take that, apply it to my own gameplay, and I've been seeing slight improvement with that. Of course, the more I practice it, the better I'll get at it. But I just wanted to give like that personal example for players who might be wondering, like, what does that look like? It's something about picking a little niche that you might be failing at, or if you're not even sure yourself, you could try to figure out with someone like a coach or something, or even other teammates or other players, and try to implement it yourself and learn from it. Or like we mentioned before, don't be afraid to ask questions. If there's something a top player does really well, or you're not sure how a certain weapon or special works, ask how they use it. Ask what kind of opportunities that they look for when they're popping their special, and or maybe their teammates ask for them to pop their special for whatever reason, and see if you can incorporate that with your team, or even yourself if you're currently a state of where it could be like a pickup scrim or something, and you want to be able to be really good be the best one within that weapon in the lobby.
Right. I like the point you bring up, and I think that kind of leads me to a little bit of an aside, but it's in the same vein.
Hmm.
When you get like, let's say you ask somebody, like you asked Storm about the wall thing.
Yeah,
I I feel like a lot of people are willing to ask questions or find the answers to questions like that. If it's like a black and white question, right?
yeah,
The next step though is the kind of you can take it at face value, right?
yep,
But the next step is trying to apply the concepts of what you learned there.
yeah,
So that could be like it requires more of like a critical thinking type thing. But
hmm,
if you're asking something about, I don't know, if you're talking about like latency, for example, you can kind of apply. Okay, so if latency is something preventing me from playing around like the corners of a wall or like through the wall trying to shower inside of it,
hmm,
where else could that be a factor as well, right?
yeah,
Could it be a factor in me turning corners, for example, or using cover in general, right? So how can I apply what I learned from the wall to this other thing, right?
hmm,
Um, and I feel like you will get a lot more mileage out of your like out of the little things that you get, even just from asking a single question or a very hyper specific question to somebody that you find knowledgeable, like being able to break that idea down to its core and apply it in other places. And that again, that kind of comes down to the fundamentals of playing other games as well. it's the same idea where you break it down and try to apply it to something else,
Yeah.
to see if it works at that point and just experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I just thought of like while you were mentioning it, it's like it's all players will try to like considering like trying to like find I thought of like trying to find different angles of doing certain things, right? A lot of players like to try to shark and get a lucky pick, right? And I just
Hmm.
thought of that thought of the the map, right? Something a lot of players struggle with opening their map. So like if there's like you get picked off and someone saw your flank side, you're like, how did they know I was there? I thought of like, well, let's say like if a player had a beacon, right? Some players don't know the full radius that can mark you if you're
Yeah,
near
it's
it
so
on the mini
crazy.
map. So that's another thing. It's like be willing to look at all the factors on the field that could have caused certain situations, right? So like obviously
Right.
like we mentioned with the wall, like latency is a big thing. Maybe just standing too close to it is another, right? Not being aware of what plays are around me. So like if I think I have a good opportunity to poke with my wall, but I didn't see a player, on my side or like behind me sharking because I chose to not spend that half a second to just throw some paint there.
Hmm.
Next thing I know, I'm getting a bomb thrown right in front of me and I'm exploding. So it's really about thinking about all those little scenarios that can be applied through what you're trying to learn and find more than just the one reason that could be happening for whatever might be going wrong.
Right. Yeah. I feel like that also. Uh, there's one thing that I keep seeing too with regards to like VODs,
Hmm.
especially where I don't know. Let's say somebody is really into like Clash Blaster or something. You're not going to see top players use Clash Blaster
Yeah.
seriously, generally.
Yeah.
So what you can do at that point is look at, let's say you're struggling with a weapon. Well, for one, you can still look at a shooter or a normal blaster or a range blaster or something like that and take a lot of the fundamentals away. Like
Hmm.
I said, you want to break down ideas to their core. So
Yeah.
even if you're not literally watching a top Clash Blaster, you can watch a top range blaster and take a lot of the ideas away from it.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, if you're struggling with like certain weapons and stuff like that, it's a good opportunity for you to actually VOD those weapons. Because even though your weapon might not have a lot of very specific, like VODs or something like that at
Hmm.
a relevant level, um, you're going to be fighting a lot of weapons that are at that relevant level. And at that point, it's still very valuable to look at those other games to kind of see, for example, if I never played a beacon weapon before
Hmm.
and I'm not used to how the beacon functions because I'm not really thinking about it mid game.
Yeah.
If you watch a tent player or something that is really like hyper focused on like how they use their beacons or something like that
Yeah.
and read that, then you're like, oh, wait a minute. Why didn't I ever think of this before? You know what I mean?
Yeah. No,
Because it's not
absolutely.
something that you're in tune with, right?
Hmm.
So botting even weapons that are completely unrelated to you it still provides a lot of value.
Hmm. Yeah. No, absolutely. Something I'll do is even I'll even play the weapons that I feel I had like the hardest like matchup sometimes with, right? And it
Exactly. Yeah.
doesn't hurt to do that, right? Even if it's in the training room, right? Just get an idea of maybe the range that it has on you as a player. Like, what's the distance that can get you picked off? Because I know something that I learned is like the AOE radius of certain blasters are a lot larger than others. And when I'll be like, I should be winning this fight. What's like, how come I'm not, I'm dying to this from so far away? Even
Mhm.
just testing out the that something that theory you just thought of for that weapon can do a mile of a difference because now you're understanding a little bit more like, okay, that's how that weapon works. What's certain things I can do to change the way I play around that weapon so that way I don't get myself caught in any tricky situations.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. And I think that even applies for when it comes to looking at other weapons.
Hmm.
It applies for your own replays too. If
Yeah.
you are watching like a replay or something of your own game where you just got washed, don't necessarily. Well, you can do whatever you want, but I would recommend looking at the enemy's point of view when
Hmm.
you do it, and just look at how dumb you look when you play.
Yeah.
It
No, it's
it'll be
valid.
it'll
It's
be
true.
bad, you know.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at the game through your own lens all the time, it's very difficult to beat your biases
Hmm.
because you're the one making the decisions in those games. So obviously, when you watch it back, if you are stuck with that like limited scope of your own perspective, you're gonna be like, "Oh man, well, I mean, I had the right idea here." I'm doing all the things right because you already think you're doing all the things right, you know?
Yeah.
But when you see it from another perspective, you're like, oh wow, I was in line of sight walking around while that charger was looking at me the entire time. That's
Yeah.
so embarrassing. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
these little things that kind of you won't notice it until you kind of pull yourself out of your own perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, 100%. I agree. Absolutely. And it's good to get a different perspective from, now it doesn't even have to be from like, like a player like in a VC. It's literally just look at how they see you.
Yeah,
Pretend
exactly.
you
Yeah.
are
Even
that
like
charger. You're that 10. Maybe even you're that, like, you did see a player you're sharking that you probably should have called. Okay, like let me look through the eyes of that sharking carbon roller, for example. How
Mhm.
did they know I was here to get me? And I know like a lot of things sometimes players don't even realize, like, you don't be afraid to use your other senses, even your hearing, right? That's something a lot of players are some at top level can be so good at. It's just hearing when somebody's just swimming by or sharking by, and they know when to get that pick when they're right next to them.
Yeah. And a lot of times you kind of know when to kind of tune yourself in during a game
Hmm.
to depending on like the game state, right?
Yeah.
So if you're trying to retake, you're going to be a lot more attempting to like listen for little sounds or something like that
Hmm.
for sharking. Whereas like if you just wipe the enemy team and you're like, okay, yeah, this guy's probably off spawn, then you can just like rush it. You don't have to really worry about like
Yeah.
sounds or something like that. So it's
Yep.
like, yeah, there's like a lot of like different contexts or whatever that can kind of clue people in, even if they don't know it, like intuitively, because I feel like a lot of it is intuition,
Yeah.
where like intuitively you know, okay, now it's time to start listening a little bit more or stuff like that, right? Um, that's a little bit harder to learn from vodding unless somebody like the player specifically points it out. Like I know Kiver does that, and Brian did that a little bit in Splatoon 2.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
It's funny. You actually I want to talk about something that you mentioned earlier because it just
sure.
popped in my head now. You mentioned about like watching tournaments and like listen to the commentators, right? See what they're saying, especially at top level. You have really good commentators that seen this game hundreds of ways, whether it's they're playing it or they're just viewing it constantly.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if you watch how many like tournaments you've watched before, either live or on at least recently, right? Or on
Yeah.
VOD, but um I remember seeing it discussed a little bit that for there are some commentary um, moments where there might be things that aren't like clearly discussed or wish talked about that happened during a game. And wanted to get maybe your thoughts on that, and if you think maybe there's certain things that can be done to adjust the ways of thinking or even talking for commentators out there to help not only new players but recurring players that are watching on the screen trying to figure out what's happening themselves instead of just hearing like the commentators yap about something.
Yeah, I tend to like the this is like personal preference. This is the thing. It's too difficult to just be like, I want somebody to do something this way,
No,
right?
yeah, 100%.
Because the audience that you're doing this for is very diverse
Yeah.
in what they want out of commentary, right?
Yeah,
I
100%.
remember back in like Splatoon 1 days, like Black and Spoon,
Hmm.
they would just take literally anybody. Like if you wanted to commentate, they'll just have you on and you could just talk about your favorite breakfast cereal or something. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
no,
If you
100%.
wanted to. And people are into that. And you know what? Good for you if you are.
Yeah.
Awesome. Where but the thing is like that's valid, but so is like the hyper analytical style as well of commentating. And it's difficult for me to just be like, well, people should be more in tune with like what's happening in the game or study the game on their own time
Hmm.
when they're commentating. It's not the right answer though. You know
Yeah,
what I
no,
mean?
yeah,
Like,
100%.
do you? I don't want to change how other people enjoy commentating. If it's
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
um the but I think if you're looking at specifically live commentary,
Hmm.
it's at least from a caster's point of view, right? They're primarily doing it. It's less to inform and more so as like an entertainment thing, if that makes sense,
Yeah, no,
right?
100%. I agree. Yeah.
Because if you're just looking at something with like live and you're like on the clock to constantly talk and fill the air and bounce off of your commentator friend or whatever,
Yep.
it's very difficult for you to actually like dive deep unless you're just like, I don't like if you have like encyclopedic knowledge or something,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Or like
Yeah.
you're playing that you're in that community, like that solved meta type community, right?
Yep.
And you've seen the same thing play out thousands of times, like literally thousands and thousands of times, right?
Yeah.
then sure, like maybe you can lean more in on the analytic stuff, and you can point out those tiny little things that change how the game is played.
Mhm.
Um, but generally, I wouldn't look towards commentators specifically to get your analysis from for that reason.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because
Yep.
one, it's live. Two, there's so many different variables that make it difficult to actually analyze in real time like that, just
Yeah.
every single game, you know?
Yep.
Or every moment to moment in a game, especially in a game as fast paced as Splatoon. But three, too, there's it's very difficult to find a balance between that really analytical type of commentary while still keeping it like friendly to like your average viewer or maybe even somebody that doesn't watch the game at all. And
Mhm.
I think, for example, like Jordan Kent and Nine, and Milana too, they do a fantastic job with their commentary for that reason, right?
Yeah.
And I especially like it with Nine, um, where like, for example, when there were like championships and worlds and stuff,
Mhm.
my parents were watching, right?
Yeah.
And they don't know anything about this
Yeah.
game,
Yeah. No, I
but the
get that.
commentary, there's such a great balance with Nine specifically, but with everybody, where they can point out like the larger phases of the game, how things are working, right?
Mhm.
But it's very clear and concise enough to even get like through to my parents, right?
Yeah.
Like they don't like my parents don't know what the game is, like what's happening in the game, but they can understand like, oh, our team is pushing. Oh, they got stopped by this special. And you know what I mean? And
Yeah,
it's very, very
absolutely.
simple. Even if they don't know what the special is or what it looks like, they just know like, oh,
Something
that
stopped
darn
it. Yeah.
yeah, that darn Kraken. I hate that Kraken. It's on the
Yeah.
enemy team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think that's personally, I feel like Nine is the gold standard when it comes uh to commentating in this community at the
Mhm.
very least. Um and I feel like if you wanted to, you can look at like again, you can look at other communities as well for that as well.
Yeah.
That isn't to say there aren't other very good commentators here. It's just I
Mhm.
don't watch too many uh tournaments
Yeah.
for the commentating. I don't pay a lot of attention
Mhm. And
in that
that's
sense.
fair, yeah.
Yeah. Um all I know is that Nine's fantastic, and I will glaze him for that. Like
Absolutely. I mean, Nine's been doing it for so long, and like Nine's even like has played this game, of course, so many times as well. So,
Yeah.
not Nine understands the aspect of really it's like really mastered, if even I'll say the aspect of entertainment and knowledge, right? And Nine's
Mhm.
able to give a bit of both. That here's a really hype moment, and let me tell you why it's so hype, while like making it like entertaining for you as well.
Right, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, man, and I love his callbacks too. Like, post-game, he would kind of explain things to get other people on board as
Oh
well. It's
yes,
very, very, very
yeah,
nice. Yeah, very, very good. But yeah, I think if you're just look up to somebody to be somebody like that is like the perfect balance. If you can
yeah,
go more analytical or more casual, it's up to you. Just give your own take on it, you know
yeah.
what I mean?
Absolutely. Do
But,
do what you feel most comfortable.
you know, but generally, I don't really like to be critical of, well, not that I don't wanna be critical because it's fine to critique people.
Hmm.
But I don't like to put any kind of blame on things like commentators and stuff
Yeah,
like that,
because there's just so
that
many
aren't
variables.
that aren't the players themselves, right?
Yeah,
Because if we're talking about improvement, right?
yeah.
So if we're talking about improvement specifically, it's not on the commentators to make you better.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? So to an extent, it's like yeah, this is kind of what I was talking about, where it's like you like a lot of it's like that kind of self-responsibility thing. Like you can look outwards, but a lot of it still stems from you. And you can like critique others and have them do quote unquote better,
Hmm.
but it's not really, like it's not the reason that somebody isn't climbing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, 100%. Yeah, there's so many other variables, and like you know, like you mentioned before, like for commentators, they have a goal, and that's to entertain, but
Right.
also give knowledgeable input for players of all types, of whether they're veterans, whether they're brand new, or if it's cases where it's like the world champs, where you're gonna have families that are watching this and supporting. And there's even I've seen it on a lot of on Twitter a lot, players that are like, oh, I was in grands in this tournament, and my family had it on in the living room. And it's like
It's
it's
so wholesome.
yeah, right. It's you love to see that there's just so supportive. I mean, I've even seen it at Lance. There are families that will be there to support their
Yeah.
kids, and it's I love seeing that because they don't know what's going on, but they'll hear the kid and the teammates get hyped for certain things, and they're like, "Yeah, we're
Mhm.
cheering. We don't know what's going on, but you're doing it. Keep going."
Dude, it's like the cutest thing. I've had it a few times when I've gone to lands where like somebody's parents would come up and start talking to me. It's like, oh yeah, my son or my daughter, or whatever, talks about like your team and stuff like that. It's like, oh, you're that guy from Sayonara, right, or
Yeah.
from Jackpot or whatever. They're like, yeah, it's so cool to see like how like into it they are. I love that. I love
Yeah.
that so much.
Yeah, it's you love to see the family support when it comes to things like that,
Yeah,
and the interest too, right? And I think that's like something that it's helpful, especially like wrapping that around with wrapping that up for the commentary is that they're able to support, and when I'm not understanding it right away, the commentators give that help to keep that entertaining for those who do or don't know, and like you said, it comes down to the players for things they're doing and the teams that how they're performing, and up to you to look towards the player skill, not the commentator skill.
yeah. If you wanted to look more like analytically, my core point is like I would try to look for those players that restream. Well, to a degree, it depends on the player,
Mhm.
like how their priority.
Yeah.
But sometimes there are players that would like restream tournaments and whatnot, and kind of
Mhm.
give a little bit more. They'll be more open to like discussion
Yeah.
or like giving their thoughts mid game. And those streamers typically aren't. Well, they can be there to entertain, right?
Mhm.
Likely,
Yeah.
but they aren't like on the same level of pressure of those casters, right?
Yeah.
So they
100%.
can like take things a little bit slower. You can ask questions, things like that.
Yeah.
If you really wanted to look for like analysis in that sense, I'd probably take that avenue.
Yeah. I know. I think most famously is Kyo, right? Kyo
Yeah,
will
Kyo definitely comes to mind.
yeah, do
Yep.
their own tournaments or even like the Sendo Q finals or even Chara's events.
Mhm.
Kyo will just do a watch party, and I've been in the chat when he's done now a couple times, and there are those moments where someone will ask a genuine question about like, oh, why would they do that or why would they pick that weapon, and Kyo will give sometimes sarcastically, but a valid reason for why a team's doing something like that. And sometimes you even get, of course, the entertainment part of things. That's like, you know, oh, why are they picking that? It's like it's not going to work at all. And then that team makes it work and they win the game. It's like, okay, I misunderstood. I didn't,
Yo,
I misjudged your game. I get it.
those are always the fun ones to look back on. I'm just reminded of the Phantom Thieves game. I can't, like the Flounder game at Worlds just blew my
Yes.
mind. Oh my god.
Yes.
I was in the back looking at Max like, dude, what are they doing? And then they ended up winning. Oh my
It's
god. I had to do
insane.
some serious self-reflection after that game. I
Yeah,
know.
it's crazy to see how like just a wild idea could take someone so far and do the
Yeah.
craziest things.
It's so cool though. I love it.
So, turning back to resources, there were some that you resources that you said that could for certain aspects of them could be maybe made or created or
Right.
made more available. Um, just like I guess like a broad idea, what are some like types of resources that maybe top players or uh mix of competitive players and content creators could try to make or formulate that could help push better ideas of players trying to get better in certain ways?
Um I this is kind of difficult because I don't want to, like I said with the caster thing,
Yeah,
I don't
it's
want to
kind of
like
like
put
that. Yeah.
blame. I want to put this in a way where it doesn't put blame on content creators or
Hmm.
top players or something like that because I don't think the blame belongs there
Yeah.
to a large extent. Um, but if I were to like suggest some things, I like what Pangit used to do this, and I think Obito tried to do this recently.
Hmm.
But I feel like in a more scripted sense, it would be more useful. I love the idea of, and we touched on this earlier with restreams,
Yes.
of
Yeah.
commentating your own gameplay, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And kind of giving an idea of like why you're doing the things that you're doing, as well as like what you notice in a game, like as you're playing through. And
Hmm.
it may not be perfect. You may mistakes in those games, but that's also valuable information as well. Because if I'm voting a top player and I see them do something kind of dumb and they die,
Mhm.
and I'm uncritical, right?
Yeah.
You'll just be like, "Oh, well, maybe they just got unlucky or something. I have to try that too," and you're gonna do it. But if you're watching their own gameplay, right, and they acknowledge that they made a mistake here, they're like, "Oh, I should have done this instead," right?
Mhm.
Even if they don't explain it, it kind of opens up the idea of like, well, one, these guys can make mistakes, so they're not perfect. But two, like, here's the way that they see the game
Yeah.
at this point in time when they do make a mistake,
Mhm.
you know? Um, and it's not always the right answer, but I think it's a lot like having those little resources are a lot more valuable than just not having anything at all
Mhm.
on that front. Um, so that goes for like videos, for like streams. I like that Kyo restreams a lot of tournaments and stuff.
Yeah.
I really wish that it was more prevalent, like more common,
Mhm.
even from doesn't have to necessarily be like restreams, but even just people streaming for no reason, going through their own replays and pointing things out. You know, just little
Yeah.
things like that. Or doing like viewer stuff. I think Reborn actually, when I got on Twitch today, he was doing like viewer reviews.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, like having little things like that where people can just come in and get analysis just like that, like very easily, even if it's not immediately relevant to them,
Mhm.
kind of helps them with the idea of like get over the hurdle of like what review or like voting is and stuff like
Mhm.
that. That's a big one. Another thing is I okay. This comes with like a big asterisk.
Mhm.
Like a VOD review guide, I think is very important.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's something that we're actually lacking. The reason there's a big asterisk is because I don't want it to be a black and white, here's how you VOD review
Yeah.
type thing. You know what I mean?
It's more of like maybe a guide that like gives you a general consensus of the different ways you can learn from your
Right.
gameplay and like the different avenues you can take to route review properly and like obviously like the big you know the big warning sign is take it with a grain of salt because everyone's different, not all these
Right.
ways may work for you.
Right, exactly. And I think to further expand on that, it's very easy to I was talking about this with FLC the other day. Actually, like on the same day or like maybe the day after.
Mhm.
Um that big tweet thread that I posted, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I don't want to say too much on like why he said the things that he did, but what he basically came to the conclusion of is like if I were to let's say I posted a VOD review guide just as is, like here's how you do things, here's how I classify different things, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
here's how you do X, Y, and Z, right? A lot of people will look at that and simplify and misconstrue the way that I am trying to like present information,
Yeah.
even if they don't mean to. Just because it makes more sense with like biases that they already have,
Yeah.
you know. Um, and what would happen is I could end up causing more harm than good. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Where it's like I can like let's say there's somebody that vods an hour a day for
Mhm.
some reason, you know,
Yeah.
and they don't play very often. Maybe like half the time they spend with Splatoon is vodding. I don't want to release a guide that teaches those people how to VOD review more effectively. Because in that same guide, I would say something like, "Don't VOD review if it cuts in too much playtime."
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
like keep like a 10-90 split or something. Just an example,
Yeah.
and that person would be like, maybe they would just ignore that and just take all the other information and leave out that one part. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I end up like like very much encouraging the wrong kind of study, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
just inadvertently, no matter what I do, you know?
Yeah.
And it kind of hit me when I looked at his like fluid rolls
Oh yes.
doc.
Yes. I remember that. Yeah.
The big thing there is like he mentions there are no roles. There are no static roles. You're not a skirmisher or a slayer or an anchor, you
Yeah.
know? But if you go on like Sendo or something and look at like player bios, it's like oh, I'm the anchor for X team.
Yeah,
You know what I
yeah,
mean? And it's
yeah,
like, okay, you totally misunderstood what he said. He wrote an entire document. And it's like, you know what I mean? And that's
yeah,
exactly what I'm talking about. Where it's like, I don't want to put others in a position where I ruined something. Like I
yeah.
messed them up. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And the problem is I don't have I'm not omnipotent. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I can't be there for every single individual
Mhm.
and say you misunderstood this. You're doing this in a way that I said not to do. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's like impossible for me to contain that level of influence once it gets out there, you know? So
Yeah.
it's like if I put out a guide like that or somebody puts out a guide like that,
Mhm.
it has to be you have to be like very careful with how it's presented,
Yeah.
right? In that sense. That's why I'm very wary. But past that, I think generally like analysis is just the best way to do it. Like show people how it's done,
Yeah.
get like demystify it and kind of keep putting it out there for the people that maybe don't have the time to VOD on their own time. You know what I mean? At
Yeah.
least give them an opportunity to see what it entails and get that line of thinking into their brain, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, so like it because yeah, that's one of the things like as someone as myself who's made a lot of guides for like beginners for the competitive. I mean, I had my overall like I still get like messages about it to this day of
Mhm,
I think I made the begin like right it was like that switch from 2 to 3 of like how to get into competitive Splatoon in general. Um and I totally get what you mean by making sure you say certain things carefully because there are a lot of aspects of that I've made in that one and like sensitivity and tilt and you name it that
mhm.
there's a lot of things you could say that other players could take a different way
Exactly.
that's
Yeah.
not the right way you're trying to put it. Like I think one example was like making a free agent post, right? And I remember when it came to a part that so I've never actually like said like how the thought of this worked when I was making the video, but when I was making about how to make a free agent post, one of the biggest and like troubling things I had to try to like topic I discussed was when you're putting your age in your free agent post because there are
Mhm,
a lot of players that could be like, you know, like, oh, but like I'm 15, but I'm mature. And it's like, all right, how do I explain to the casual viewer that while that's okay, like some players might not be okay with playing someone that's younger, right? So
mhm,
it really came down to finding the ways to word certain things and something like that where it could be agreed upon. It's like I think I ended up saying it's not your fault that you know or it's not you know that they don't want to necessarily play with someone that's not mature. They feel they're mature. It's just that some players don't feel comfortable or there's a lot of varying aspects that make it difficult to want to team with players that have that much of a gap or a certain feel towards that way. So it's challenging. It really is, and I think a VOD review guide is probably one. It's up there for one of the most challenging guides somebody can make because of just how many variables there are.
right. It's impossible. It's actually just impossible. I At least to make something comprehensive, like,
Yeah, like I feel
that
like there could be
completely
like
encompasses.
in a sense a beginner guide to it. Like okay, like if you know here are some I guess maybe giving examples and setting up certain like avenues and set up routes
Yep.
for players like here's what it would look like even like maybe even like a section in the video of like here's how VOD viewing works and here's like my experience of what it was like and here's how it could look for you but again take it with a grain of salt and I think that's
Yep.
one of the largest things that has to try to be like almost consistently pushed out throughout that video is take all this with a grain of salt everyone's different everyone has different experiences and ways they're trying to do things you know
Yeah.
so
I
be
I
careful.
I that's the thing too, is like I feel like no matter how many times you say something like that,
It could
somebody's
still
gonna
fly right
misconstrue it.
over. Yeah.
Because a lot of people, like, they take the ideas and they spread the ideas,
Yeah.
right? They don't spread the video specifically.
Mhm.
And same thing with like the fluid rolls doc, right? You take
Mhm.
the ideas out of the fluid rolls doc and then you normalize those ideas,
Yeah.
and those ideas kind of mutate into something that the original source wasn't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if I normalize VOD review through my video, that idea can change into something else that I am a little worried about, because like I said, you can keep it very basic, but it's very difficult to go further in depth, and I don't want to like push the wrong habits, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, at the same time, I think something very, very beginner, as in like, this is my experience, this is how I do things,
Mhm.
can be better than just saying this is how to VOD review. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that could be a lot better of a way to go about it. So I do like that idea.
Yeah, I think giving players like your experience and allowing them to branch off of your experience and be that I think it's good to share both sides of like good and bad VOD reviewing, right? And just kind of
Hmm.
like, kind of like here's what I went through. For you, it's going to be different because you're you and I'm me, but this is
Right.
how it's helped me, or this is how I've learned from these experiences with VOD reviewing and where I'm at now when I've done it, and I think that's
Hmm.
something that you know that could branch into whether it's a top player doing it or even like any player really, or like if just a bunch of players want to collaborate and make a big video project on it, just kind of giving the different alt perspectives and allowing more players to be like, okay, it's not just one person that's saying this. It's like there's a group of players that all have different experience with this. You know, this is worth a shot. This is worth trying to get better.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. That's not something I've actually considered very much.
Mhm.
So I like the idea that you're kind of expanding on that idea too, because I just haven't thought about
Yeah.
going that route of just making it less of a formal idea
Hmm.
and more of something that is um
More
just
creative and like a much
experience based.
more
Yeah.
shared experience of it. So that's
Right.
the
Yeah.
content
That's
brain
a
in
good
me.
idea. I do actually like that a lot.
That's the content brain in me. It's quickly
Yeah.
thinking
No,
on
I
what
like
to
it. It's
expand.
good. I love that. That's solid.
So I guess like that kind of like answered the one of the last questions I had, which was what can I guess top players or um that like maybe don't make content, like what can they do to like help mid to lower level, just players in general that are lower skilled than them, get
Hmm.
better and improve. And I think that's just overall been answered throughout everything. It's just it's really just giving your perspective, being able to
Hmm.
support and help those players that might reach out or helping. And we've seen a lot of fantastic great players in the community go up from like Metafy and offer their eyes and support um their coaching abilities, whether that be they know how to coach or they're trying it fresh, and like obviously giving the disclaimer of like, hey, like I will try to coach you, but just be wary, like I've never coached before.
Right.
Um so I think that's pretty much been answered. I guess the other one of the last questions I will say is for players that maybe want to start learning how to VOD. Like I'm talking like fresh, right? This is for those players that
Hmm.
maybe have never really dove deep into VOD reviewing or learning from certain aspects of the game. What can players start to do, or can they start learning, whether it's VOD reviews or reflections in between matches and games, or even in between deaths? Because I've seen that a lot of players like try to think like, okay, how did I die there? What was I doing just like 5 seconds before? Obviously, that's a
Hmm.
quick brain. That's a quick thought process. So take it with a grain of salt that I said that. but but to begin the process of being able to shoot higher in whether that's the divisions, the skill level, you name it.
It's contextual. So if you're at like a very, very low level, and I mean like not even S plus
Hmm.
for comp, right?
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't really worry about botting.
Hmm.
There's a certain point, and I think this might be a little controversial.
Hmm.
The bar is very high when it comes to how much value, or rather the floor is high when it comes to the amount of value that you're going to get out of voting, right?
Okay. Yeah.
The higher, the better you are, the more important it becomes to an extent, right?
Yeah.
Because there's like a hard cap.
Yeah.
um because to a certain extent you're cutting into the amount of time that you can play,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And the better you are, the more you have to play to keep your like mechs sharp.
Yeah.
um So I think if you're at a point where like you're super fresh to the game, even at a competitive level, the answer literally is just to play more,
Hmm.
but also to play more in a way that pushes your boundaries. So even if that means like not playing with your if you have an established team, not only just playing with your team or
Yeah.
not only just playing open, but like push X rank in not for power or anything, but just to get as many games in and to stress your mechanics or stress your ideas as much as you can.
Yeah.
Not to win or lose. Winning or losing doesn't matter,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, but the more like stress you put yourself under, the more um the more you kind of pull yourself away from going like autopilot or giving yourself time to think things through in game, right? Because you want to like ingrain these ideas, you know? So
Yeah.
like if you're in a this is getting a little wordy, but if you're like, I don't know, in like a testing room and you're training your aim, you've seen those people on Twitter that are like god aimers in the testing
Yes.
room,
Yes.
you
I know
know?
exactly
Like
what
they
you
can do it
mean.
with their eyes closed.
Yeah.
But then you put them in a game and they can't hit like half of those shots.
Hmm.
You know? Like they could be good mechanically, but they're not nearly as good as those people like as they are in the training room.
Yeah.
And it's because if you're testing in a low stress environment or you're testing in a very static environment, you're mastering playing in that environment.
Yep.
So the second you end up in some place where you're like a little bit out of your league, like there's players better than you, maybe you only practice in turf war or in the training area.
Hmm.
If you go into X rank, you're just gonna get washed, right?
Yeah.
But if you go into tournament into not tournament into like turf war or something, you're just bodying other players,
Yeah.
and it's largely because the environment that you're practicing is totally different, and one is way higher stress than the other, right?
Yeah.
So you're actually being pushed towards your intuition and your understanding and your confidence more than you are in lower stress environments, right?
Yeah.
So getting away from your team, getting away from comfortable environments like that can push you to be a better player over the long term.
Mm.
As long as you don't like tilt too hard.
Yeah.
But that comes with like a separate like ego thing.
Yeah.
Um, but so there's that specifically, and I think that goes for like average players, like across the spectrum of skill,
Mm.
but especially for lower rated. As you get a little bit better though, you would want to VOD focusing on yourself, right? And I touched on this a little bit earlier, where you kind of learn from other people and other perspectives.
Mm.
I would not recommend and this is very contradictory to what I used to say, but
Hmm.
I've kind of grown past it. I would not recommend starting by VODing yourself. I
Uh-huh.
would go into looking at somebody else, somebody like a top player or something,
Yeah.
and trying to mimic what they're doing.
Mm.
Like putting your own play style aside for 1 or 2 sessions, 1 or 2 days, and trying to take notes of how they're positioning, the fights that they're taking, like who they're fighting specifically,
Hmm.
like short range, long range, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, take notice of like where they're throwing their bombs, things like that, right? If they're playing objective, how they're positioning around the objective, little things like that. And then go into your game with a goal in mind outright. And trying to copy that one to one, the next session, you can spend, let's say you pick out 3 games about 30 minutes into your session or an hour into your session, um, and spend like 10, 15 minutes looking at those
Yep.
and pointing out, okay, where did I differ from the ideas from my notes that I wrote down?
Hmm.
And then those little things is like, okay, so what pushed me to make to differ in this sense? Was it like
Yeah.
a habit that I had? Is that habit bad or good? Right? Did it work out in the context of this game? Doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean it's the right idea, but it worked out. So something went right in this sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And a
Absolutely.
lot of it comes down to breaking down those ideas and saying, okay, so now with this information, with these mistakes that I made, with these things that ended up working that I copied from this top player, how can I apply this to like just generally, right? How
Yeah.
can I make it a habit? And you turn those ideas that you've taken into like an actionable goal.
Mm.
So you can, for example, if you want to hammer in positioning, right? You can make it a point in which you can tally like, okay, when the game phase shifted from like let's say we stopped the push or
Mm.
something and we can like retake mid, did I consistently position around where I said I want to position? and you'll tally all the times that you didn't, and then look at the context of like, okay, I didn't position here, why?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Um, with the idea of like having very consistent games that you can look back on, because if you're able to take account of as many control variables as you can see the differences. You can see the context of which maybe going that position is a bad idea, you know,
Yeah.
or maybe it was the best answer. But why is it the best answer? And you saw it was the best answer for this top player that you voted, but it also worked in this other situation that you encountered, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and it, like I said, it shouldn't take more than a little bit. I really don't want people to misconstrue this. This is what I'm really worried about.
Yeah, no, I
It
get it.
does not take longer than like 15 minutes. You can just watch the games back in real time while looking at your notes. Please
Yeah.
play more than you study. Um, but that said, that is probably the best way to go about it starting out, and it's probably the way you can go about it as like a cycle. Like you just do it and make it a habit. Um, with the exception of like VODing tournaments, there's a little bit of like other VODs as you get significantly better,
Yeah.
where it starts to become a thing where your individual mistakes aren't as impactful. They still are, but they aren't as impactful as how you play as a team, but also how you guys counterplay. Do you think getting a sorry, I'll read that after. Um, so that would come down to, and this is where VODing gets a little bit more in depth and
Mhm.
analytical in
Yeah.
this sense, where you have to start voting the enemy team and counterplaying off of what you know you're going to start fighting.
Mhm.
But again, I wouldn't worry about that until like a very top level. And at that point, I'd probably like, again, you don't want to cut into your playtime. I'd probably get somebody else to do it for you. And
Yeah,
then you
yeah.
kind of put in your own perspective based on how you're playing out the game as well, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you made a lot of really good and valid points. And I think like something that like while I was thinking about what I was thinking while you were speaking about it is about thinking about the things that work, right? And I know a biggest thing is like people always say like don't play too much solo queue, right? Because you're gonna build up bad habits. And a good example I'd love to give for that, like you mentioned, with when it comes to certain positionings, right? Some
Hmm.
players might position or see a top player position a certain way in a tournament, and then they'll try it in like open or something, or like they'll try it or they'll try something in open and it works and it won't work in a tournament. And
Hmm.
it's about, like you said, just questioning everything, like why did it work here or why didn't it work there. And it's thinking about the variables that there are, and as you get higher and higher and the more you play competitively, especially on a team, you start to realize the changes that are from open uh to tournaments, right? And the biggest thing, of
Right.
course, is the communication, right? So someone on an open isn't going to call out to their teammate, or someone in like X rank isn't going to call out to a teammate like, "Hey, there's somebody on this side." All they have is two buttons to work with, which is this way and ouch or booyah.
Hmm.
So, so
Yeah, you can abuse that so hard.
yeah,
Like,
exactly. And then yet you could have in a tournament where they can actually communicate with each other and say like, "Hey, there's somebody on me on the right side." Next thing you know, you have two players running you down, and that's why it's always worth even looking at the other team's perspective. Sometimes it's like, okay, how did they know I was here, or what did they see that ended up causing someone else to come over, and just really thinking outside the box of all variables besides, oh, they're shooting at me because they saw me at an angle. But it's like, okay, well, why did it turn to a 2v1? How did this other player come over? And that's when you, again, like I mentioned, think outside the box. If it's a tournament, there's probably call outs, there's, positionings they're coming up with, where something like
mhm.
X rank or just solo queue in general, it's so randomized. Literally anything and everything can happen and go well or wrong with for you there.
Right, yeah, no, yeah, definitely. Like, you have to kind of when you look for your VODs, you have to look for VODs within the context of what you want.
Yeah.
To a large extent, you can get away. I feel like you can get away with um with just grinding out solo queue,
Mm-hmm.
even if it does reinforce bad habits.
Mm-hmm.
Because in this game, mechanics are just so important, and they
Yeah.
will trump smart play if you're that much better mechanically than the enemy team.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you and this is again why it's so important to play the game a lot and not overly study. You can be an absolute mastermind at this game, but it doesn't matter when Timmy, that's cracked out on Red Bull, can just run it down and just beam 3 of you anyway, you
You're
know?
so right
Like,
about
"Oh,
that.
you're so perfectly positioned, but unfortunately, you didn't account for this one roller sharking in this one little corner that you guys can't hit because his movement's just insane," you know? And it's like, okay. Like,
Yeah,
so
no, for real.
to a large extent, even if you can just get up to, like, a really high X power just by grinding it, and you're just very, very consistent mechanically,
Mhm.
you can just be stupid at the game, you know? And it'll work. Like you can get to a pretty high level competitively, right?
Yeah.
And then obviously to a certain point it falls off because now people start counterplaying you and put and like they will match your mechanical skill. So once you match somebody's mechanical skill, or maybe you're a little bit better than them,
Yeah.
but they're a lot smarter than you, all of a sudden it doesn't matter nearly as much, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah,
Um,
there's a barriers to it all. It's,
right.
you could be so good mechanically up to a point where you're starting to match other players' mechanics, and that's where the smart thinking comes into play.
Exactly. Yeah.
That, okay, I'm good mechanically. Now let me start moving into the next step of what are some ways that I can get better thought process wise and planning wise, and et cetera,
Mhm.
to outplay this other player in more ways than just being good.
Yeah. It's just the I cannot stress enough how important mechanics are specifically
Hmm.
over even just game knowledge, right?
Yeah.
You'll have obviously a baseline of game knowledge, but I'm talking about like the team wide macro scale game knowledge where you need to like coordinate specifically in very specific ways
Yep.
to like optimize for a specific map. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing. Um So long as you're not just like, I don't know, dropping mid every game for no reason and then just killing yourself, you know?
Yeah.
Even if you're really good mechanically, like you'll in X rank, you're gonna be taught not to do that as you get better and better and better, assuming you're like very, very good. Because you'll just kind of get punished for it in that sense. Um, you'll still learn good habits. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, 100%.
Yeah, yeah.
Like there's a lot of
You just
like
won't learn how to play comp. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. There's a lot of
Yeah.
benefits to playing a lot of solo queue, and like the biggest thing is like of course with X rank. I know that's was one of the biggest changes from like S2 to S3 was the option to choose your region, right? And there were
Mhm.
so many players that picked over to the JP region because the players over there are just so mechanically gifted, and because they also grind the game a lot, right? They are playing this game like practically every day and for long times on end
There's just
if
so many
they're
more
able to.
players there too, so you get
That,
better
yeah,
matchmaking.
Splatoon is massive in Japan, so you have so many
Yeah.
players that are getting higher in that skill levels that you see so many NA and EU players on the western side pick that region to try to get better, regardless of the latency. Like it's just
Mhm.
there's an option to get better, they want to pick it, and I don't blame them for that. And I think it's a really good option. I know I've experienced myself just when I picked NA this time around. I've been playing so much more consistently than I ever have before, and my mechanics are getting better, but there are times I'm finding players who are much more mechanically better, and that builds me to start that thinking of like, okay, like what are some things that maybe I did differently that game mechanically that I can improve on to try to get better. So the next time if I run into them or anyone in similar in that skill level, I'll be able to beat.
Right, yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree, for sure. Um,
I know someone in the chat did ask if get you think getting a personal coach is important.
actually, there were a couple I think there was one other question too.
Oh yeah, for the average player, would scrims generally be better to practice than an X rank?
Okay, so I'll start with that one because it was first.
Yeah, you got it.
So for the average player, the average competitive player, I'm assuming you mean, so somewhere around, like, mid-level or, like, upper low level,
Hmm.
I'm guessing?
Yeah, we
Would
could
scrims
stick
generally
there.
be
Yeah.
better practice than an X? The thing is, okay, so keep in mind, I am out of touch because I do not practice personally.
Hmm.
At that level. I don't practice at all because I don't play this game. You know what I mean?
Valid.
I
Yeah.
only like analyze it.
Yeah.
Um, scrims are better to a point because remember what I said about comfort? You want to keep yourself from getting too complacent in the position that you're in, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So, for example, and this is something I suffered in when I was playing comp, and this is something I still see people suffer. Let's say I'm the Zap man on the team or like the very passive kind of player, like the quote unquote support player, right?
Yeah.
Massive air quotes,
Hmm.
right? It's very easy, and same thing with like the kind of backline range players, right?
Yeah.
It's very easy to get used to having a very aggressive team of like frontline weapons that are very good at fighting and holding their space, right?
Hmm.
So you can kind of just like sit back and chill, you know?
Yeah.
And what that can culminate into if you're not grinding on your own time and pushing your boundaries
Yeah.
is you just start like going like 3-6 every game and you're not really having impact. And it's very difficult to push yourself out of there because once you get to a point where you're very comfortable in your position and you're like, okay, I know what I need to do, but it's not really that much because my teammates kind of got that, you know. I'm
Hmm.
not pushing my mechanics. I'm not really, you know, you're not taking fights, you're not initiating. Um, you'll start falling behind even if you don't realize it.
Yeah.
And when you go into like something like solo queue or a pickup, those games become unplayable
Hmm.
because your environment changes and you need to adapt. But because you haven't been stressing every avenue, right,
Hmm.
of your gameplay, you you just can't have an impact, you know? You start just getting diffed because it's like, dude, why is this roller flanking? I'm so used to playing back here. Why are they just walking through our like front line? But your front line isn't the front line that you're used to, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's good to scrim, but it's not better to scrim. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's no one thing that's better than another. You have to take, oh, did somebody just drop from a call?
Uh, was that the bot that just
I think
got
so.
destroyed? Oh no. Hold on, wait. Let me bring it back. Wait.
Was that comms or?
I think so. Let me check. Hold on. I got you. I got you. Okay, we should be good. All right, everything should be
Okay.
okay. I think.
Okay, there we
Yeah,
go.
it's okay. The bot.
So
That's the first time the bot's ever done that. See, I told you, it
it's all
can't
good.
go one of these episodes without
We need that
something
one
bad
bump. I'm telling
happening.
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. So what was I saying? Oh yeah.
Then
So there's
yeah.
no one avenue that's the best. You have to always keep yourself uncomfortable when you
Mhm.
play the game.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of seeing it because yeah, everyone looks for that one perfect solution, right? What is
Hmm.
that one thing that will make me better, and get me better at this game? But the best answer is there isn't one single thing. There's so
Yeah,
many different
exactly.
routes you can take. Honestly, a good mix of solo queue and scrims might work really well because you're getting a taste of a group effort of competitive, which the game is right 4v4. You're getting that taste of that, and there's different weapon ideals, and that you're learning and you're expanding your knowledge on, what might so competitively players might like a lot more to working together and paired more. While solo queue gives you that mechanical aspect of there's players you could fight that could be the best of the best or the worst of the worst, and
Mhm.
anywhere in between. So you have so many different varieties and variables that just affect both sides.
Right. There is one thing that I want to mention, and this is something that Pika mentioned in his video as well.
Hmm.
The one thing that scrims, well, there are many things that scrims have over X rank, as there is the other way around.
Yeah.
But one big thing that X rank has, or sorry, scrims have, as well as something like Sendocue, if you can manage it, because I don't know what's going on there,
Hmm.
is you can, on paper, challenge people that are better than you at will, basically,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So if you did want to like push that specific thing, like, oh, I want to challenge our team play, my individual mechanics, right? Especially if you're kind of like a frontline or like fighty kind of weapon.
Yeah.
Um, you can try to like match up that kind of environment where you're still being pressured heavily, right?
Hmm.
More than you would normally. Um, but you're not like in a completely foreign environment. But that's like a subsection of scrims. You know what I mean? That's not like all your scrims, but it's like a minor thing.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think, and it's good to, it's always good to keep that open mind and, you know, use all of your resources that are available to you all the time. And I think that's something that Sendoku, or like you mentioned, like it allows you to at will choose a team that's better than you. And of course, it's up to that team if they're willing to actually go against you. But even in general,
Yeah.
those scrims too, though in general too, right? It's always possible to you can always reach out to a team that's higher level, maybe a div or two or three, and you
Mhm.
say like, hey, like we're trying to get better. We're looking for a team that's gonna give us a run for our money, and make us like learn from that. Obviously, with a grain of salt. Don't be going, messaging like Moonlight if you're in sitting in, not lowing ban yet, because they will
Yeah.
more they will run through you more than you think. But still, it doesn't hurt to reach out and um, try to get that opportunity.
Right. Yeah.
So the other
Oh
question that
man,
was
there
asked
was
about the
something.
personal coach is it important? Do you feel?
No, I I feel like it. It kind of feels like you, not you, the person who questioned that.
In
It
general.
feels, yeah, when you get somebody that it depends how the coaching is done.
Hmm.
There's coaching that is like teaching you how to learn, and that kind of coaching is great, I think, when it
Yeah.
comes to especially personally. There's another kind of coaching that's like, here's how I think this should have gone. So this is how you're going to start thinking.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that coaching I don't think helps much. And that's a general trend. Like it's very hard for that second kind of coaching to uh like go very far past like an immediate change, maybe, if
Hmm.
even. Unless they can like very well explain their ideas,
Yeah.
and also the recipient can very well apply those core fundamentals to like other aspects of their gameplay.
Hmm.
um it's very like hit or miss. But when it comes to personal coaching, right, I don't like the idea of that being taken to an extreme, because it's very easy to do, where the coach is just telling you to do things and you're just like, let's say you're trying to learn the game, you're just like, oh, okay, I guess I'll do that. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And just not really put more thought into it. Which is what I see a lot of coaching is in this community, and it's a thing in like most communities because it's kind of easy, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but if we're talking like the first kind of thing where it's like explaining concepts, getting the person to come to their own answers, that kind
Yeah.
of thing,
Yeah.
I don't think it's important. You don't need it, but it's always good to have other perspectives. And it doesn't have to be a coach either. You don't need a personal coach. It could just be like, the way I started out playing comp was I had a group of like casual friends and we'd meet in a streamer's PBs,
Uh-huh.
super casual, not even
Yeah.
competitive. And we would just play each other in like PBs with streamers or whatever. And we did that for like months and months and months, and we all got better for it, you know, because
Yeah.
we're all like bouncing off of each other, and we have this like kind of, you know, open environment where we can just like talk to each other about different things.
Yeah.
And that's basically like personal coaching, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, to an extent. But the core idea there is like you have somebody to bounce ideas off of. You don't need a personal coach to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think only getting, only getting one other person's perspective is dangerous in a sense, right?
It
Because
is, absolutely.
you're getting that one person's way of thinking, their thought process, their ideals, and when you decide to open that up more, right, and you expand that knowledge of maybe somebody else, whether that's a friend, whether it's your teammate, whether that's, a different coach. You're
Mhm.
looking now at multiple different parties that have a different way that they see the game and the way they view it. So it's always good to have that open mind of, while it's good to get coached by, player A, it's good to also get coached by player B, C, and D because they're going to give what they've gone through and what they've experienced and what they have seen and what they have learned and try to shed all their knowledge onto you. And whether you want to take each of that, ideally don't take each one at face value, but feel free to kind of come to a general consensus with a lot of things that are being said and implement to see which ones work for you. After all, a lot of the way Splatoon works is trial and error. You're not going to get it right the first
Right.
time. You're not going to get it right the 900th time. It takes time. It takes practice. Eventually, you'll get better. It's just about having that. Sorry, fireworks are blaring right now. It's all about finding those, about accepting and finding those different views to help you as a player get better.
Right. And I think a big thing too is like you mentioned like getting different coaches. They don't have to be coaches. It can literally just be like just having a discussion with somebody or asking a question to somebody that rolled you in a PB. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
not like, "Hey, did you notice anything?" No, like try to find something specific to ask them, right? Something that they can give you because I promise you nobody's watching how you play
Hmm.
unless you're just like perma feeding for some reason and it's like they're laughing. You know what I mean? Like if
Yeah.
you're just dropping. But yeah, I would always like the big thing is like when you approach people, come with a question. Don't come with a general like help me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Feel free to like be very, be very specific. Yeah, like you mentioned,
The
like
more
hey,
specific the
yeah,
better.
exactly. Like if is there a situation that you thought something might work, but your team didn't want to do it for whatever reason, or is there like something that you tried and it didn't work out, and you just want to know why it didn't work or why it went wrong? Feel free to ask that specifically and see what someone has to say, or see what multiple people have to say. It can't hurt to
Mhm,
get more opinions and more thought processes about why these things aren't going well, or why it should go, or why it did go right. Things like that. I think that's something that a lot of players don't do enough, honestly, is ask
mhm.
why certain things went right. Because we all
Absolutely,
want to
yeah.
learn what goes wrong, but there are those situations like it went right. Find out why, right? And that's that way maybe you can implement it next time, or if it's just your luck and it's like, all right, well maybe it shouldn't have went right, but it did.
Right, yeah. I think as you asked another question,
Yes. Yeah.
if you feel stuck like you aren't improving, what would be the best way to go about improving, I'm guessing? Like you're reviewing your games and looking at other people's games, but still not improving, what would be the best thing to do? Um, the question is a little bit too general, but because it depends on a lot of different factors. And
Yeah.
I've said this 100 times, but it's true. Like it just depends on different factors.
Yeah, I think honestly,
Um,
I think for a general, like not even a general answer, but if there's any situation you feel stuck in, I think it's always good to take a step back
yeah, I was gonna say the
and
same thing. Yep.
breathe, right? Because like you could, like for me personally, I've played I think X rank for like 2 to 4 hours every day for 2 to 3 weeks straight,
Hmm.
but I've made sure to take 1 to 2 breaks, and like the timing of throughout the day when I do that helps me out because you can only get so good while grinding out solo queue sessions or scrim sessions or tournament sessions. And of course, everyone wants to be able to have that story like, oh, I got so good so fast, because we've seen it before in the scene, right? We have plenty of teams that go from I just won low rank, hey, I just beat a Div 1 pickup team. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
while it's a cool story to have, it's so important to take those breaks when you feel like you might be stuck, and why you feel like you're getting maybe more frustrated than you usually would, or 100 other reasons under the sun. Taking a break is so important.
I think it goes even a little bit deeper than that too. There could be if let's say you take like a week break for
Hmm.
something, what you're doing in that week break, you're getting rusty, but you're also your habits themselves are getting rusty.
Hmm. Yeah.
So it's possible that there's some kind of bad habit that you're doing. So basically, you know how you can come back sometimes and you're better than when you left.
Yeah.
You know, I had that a lot with OS, and it bugs me that I never figured out what it was. But I would leave, come back, and I'm better. Like I'm
Yeah.
scoring PBs.
Yeah.
And what that is, from my understanding, is you're reinforcing bad habits in your practice without even noticing.
Hmm.
And what happens is when you take a break, those habits get rusty. You get worse at performing whatever habit it is, or maybe
Hmm.
you're not attuned to that exact thing. You're
Yeah.
doing that worse, and it in turn is making your play better. It doesn't. It's backwards, but apparently, like it happens. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What you could do on top of taking maybe even an extended break, like a week break or something, and see
Hmm.
what changed in your play style. Um, you could also, that aside, take a step back in what it is that you're trying to change.
Hmm.
Because if you're plateauing really, really hard and you're like, dude, all this stuff I'm doing is not working, right?
Yeah.
Try something new. Put yourself in a different environment, right? Look at a different concept to optimize, right? Play another game, right?
Yeah.
Get different ideas in that sense, and then come back to what you were doing before and see if you have a different perspective on it. There's no one perfect answer, right?
Yeah.
but your experience as a whole can shape your perspective, and other people's experiences can use well, their shaped perspectives can change your own perspective, and that itself can like change how you end up playing the game or anything like that. Um, but also, I just saw you posted right now. That's what I was wondering. Plateauing, it is normal to plateau, right? There's
Mhm.
a lot of moments where you plateau because maybe you're missing something, or it could be as simple as you're just playing too much, or maybe your habits outside of the game are poor. There's so many different factors, right?
Yeah.
Just changing something up, the way you see the game, what you're playing, the amount of time you're committing, right? Can get you like off that plateau. And then another big thing is consistency. If you don't feel yourself getting better, especially mechanically, it's a big thing, or in your headspace, your awareness, something like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different factors outside of the game that you're probably not even like factoring in.
Yeah.
And like off the top of my head, are you exercising daily? Are you going to sleep at reasonable times? Are you, like you said, taking breaks while playing, right? If you could play a 4 hour session, don't play 4 hours straight. Take breaks every once in a while,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Are you taking those breaks consistently, right? Are you playing for 3 hours and then taking a 5 minute break and then playing for the rest of the time? Or are you taking like every 4 games or every 3 games, you take a 5 minute break,
Yeah.
Um, are you eating at the right time? Are you waking up at the same time?
Mhm.
Are you eating even the same foods? If you're eating the same types of foods at the same time, did you get all your work out the way, or do you have homework waiting or work waiting or
Yeah.
something like that? All these little things can build up and add up to make it. And obviously, there's way more different factors, right?
Yeah. 100%.
Um, they all add up and build up and kind of kill your ceiling, your potential ceiling towards like playing well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's like a big like consistency thing. If you feel yourself playing well one game and then maybe not after, um, but yeah. Also a big one is the amount of time that you're playing over the course of the week. So for example, let's say I don't know, you have a life. Ugh, right?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you're playing a I don't know, like 10 hours total,
Yeah.
and you play 1 hour Monday, skip Tuesday, skip Wednesday, play 2 hours Thursday, an hour Friday, and then all the rest of your time is on Saturday, Sunday, right?
Yeah.
You're not playing consistently, right?
Yeah.
You're probably better off playing, let's say you can squeeze out like an hour and a half every single day, or maybe take 1 day break, maybe a little bit more over the weekend, right?
Yeah.
Play a consistent like play session where you're not trying to burn yourself out to get like playtime in over like the course of like one day. If you're playing 8 hours in one day and like 2 hours or 1 hour or 30 minutes on another day, try to like balance that out a little bit more as best as you can. Um, and you'll get more consistent practice over the long term as well, because you're factoring out that kind of mid session burnout as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's I love everything you said about that. Like it's it's good to build that schedule, right? And if you're
Mhm.
able to, I mean, of course, there's so many, like you said, there's too many variables to count.
Mhm.
And something can just happen suddenly too, and you can't really predict those things. And it's really just take it as you can and as you will. And
Yeah, you have to do it as best you can.
yeah, and that's so important. And I know a lot of players, and did not no one specific, but there are players out there that you know put so much time into video games overall, rather than certain IRL situations or certain IRL stuff they got going on, whether that's school, work, you name it, that it can affect you severely. I think the biggest thing it affects is obviously your mental, right? There's so many
Mhm.
things that could go on that, you could be out of nowhere start tilting again, or start tilting for the first time, and you're like, well, I've never done this before. Why is it happening? And you gotta just take that step back and look at the big picture. Like, what is
Yep. Like
everything
what's going
going
on in your
on?
life? Yeah.
Yeah, what's everything going on right now, and what can I do to, fix the way I'm acting and the way I'm doing in this game that can be, if not changed, fixed, or helped, and go
Mhm.
from there.
One thing, this might come off a little bit weird. One thing that helped me when I was like playing comp still towards like the tail end,
Hmm.
was actually kind of in the same spirit of like exercise, which I started picking up at that point too.
Mm,
But meditation is like a really big thing, not like in a spiritual sense, but in a sense where you just kind of cut yourself out of everything and just like think.
mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like give your time to like parse through like what you're feeling, maybe why you're feeling it, things like that. You can kind of like come to, I guess it's hard to explain, but kind of like come to like acceptance of like your current status in life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Your current state. And it can help kind of ease that like mental burden that you might not even like recognize that you have. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In the same way, like if you have homework due the next day and you haven't done it, but you're out here playing Splatoon for some reason,
Yeah.
even though you may not be thinking that in the moment, it's it's like a stress in your brain that you might not even
Yeah, it's
think.
like the
You know what I mean?
fly in the room. Like you know it's there, it's not bothering you directly, but like you just knowing its presence and that it's at some point it's gonna
Yeah.
fly past your face is it's just in the back of your mind, and then over time it's slowly and slowly gonna start eating you up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, something I like that my a good friend of mine, the name is Pa, they've that I've learned from them is like don't be afraid to just take time to just be by yourself and just
Oh,
talk
for
with
sure.
yourself. Like no
Yeah.
phone, no TV. Like if you have to just sit in your room or if you're able to drive, find a nice area, just kind of relax. I know sometimes people love going on nature walks. Take a little bit of time, just go on a little bit of a walk and just kind of have that self conversation with yourself and just really just let yourself breathe because when we're
Mhm.
surrounded by obviously a screen of Splatoon and flashing colors, bright colors for so long, so many hours, so many days, so many weeks, months, years that sometimes you just need to have that little bit of a break and that reset.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. 100% agree. Solid.
Well, I know that is all the questions I know I have, and if the chat doesn't have um, anything else to add to or anything else to ask as well, that pretty much does it for this episode. Ren, I want to give you this time to say anything else you'd like to add, shout out whoever you'd like to shout out or thank. The floor is yours.
Cool. Well, okay, firstly, thank you for offering the invite because that's
Of
awesome to be
course.
able to come on here and like speak with everybody through your platform. I really appreciate that genuinely. Um, and I guess thanks to everybody here too. Just trying to hear what rambling thoughts I have. Yeah, should be a shout out. No, thank you. Um, there is one shout out. My picture was made by my girlfriend, and you should follow her. Okay, at Piano Ducks. I'm gonna post it in the chat
I
if you
was
don't
gonna say,
mind,
feel free, go ahead.
dude.
It's a fire FBO.
Yo, it goes hard,
I
no?
love it. It goes so hard.
Okay, she deserves the shout out if anything. Here you go. That's all.
That's so base. Love it. Love it. I love it. Absolutely. No, that's awesome. For real. Thank you so much for joining, for accepting the invite, and being able to just talk about so much today. I mean, your perspectives on certain aspects of the game and just thoughts on the way the community can start building the level of development for all types of players, whether that be players who are at the top or at the very bottom, casuals or not. I mean, this has been a fantastic talk, and we had a lot of great topics discussed that are more minor in tune with it, but
Mhm.
also even questions that the community has in chat. Which, of course, thank you to the chat for coming in and being able to talk about or ask these kind of questions that maybe aren't answered all the time or not every day. That's just sitting in people's the back of their minds, but are never truly thought to be asked and outsourced. So with that being said, that is going to be the end of this episode of the Cactus Patch. Once again, thank you everyone for coming on out. We had some amazing raids today as well for more people to come in and listen to Ren speak about the player skill development. Feel free to give them a follow on social medias. I believe it's on Twitter at Ren97 underscore, right?
I think it's the other way around. It's always mixed
Underscore?
up.
It's one of those.
Underscore first, Red
All right,
97. Yeah.
underscore Red97. Feel free to give him a follow. Thank you guys so much for coming out to today's episode of the Cactus Patch. And ideally, I will see you next week for another episode.
Bye.